The evening air in Buckingham Palace was unusually heavy, the corridors of the East Wing echoing with faint footsteps and whispers that seemed to follow Thomas Aldridge wherever he went. The seasoned guard moved silently, boots gliding over the polished marble, his uniform crisp and immaculate despite the hours of duty. For decades, he had patrolled these halls, learned their secrets, and defended their occupants with unwavering loyalty. Yet tonight, an unusual tension pressed against his chest, a premonition that something extraordinary, dangerous, or scandalous was about to unfold. Camilla, the queen consort, had not been seen in this wing for hours, and yet her presence now seemed undeniable. Thomas had been alerted by the faint sound of heels clicking across distant corridors, echoing with the authority and purpose that only she could command. Something was in her hands, a small, locked velvet box, its weight and secrecy radiating a quiet intensity that immediately caught Thomas's trained instincts. The staff had whispered about such boxes before, artifacts or documents of personal and historical significance, forbidden to be handled without strict approval. And now, Camilla, moving with that careful precision that concealed both charm and control, was intent on taking it elsewhere. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he followed her movements from the shadows. He had served the royal household long enough to recognize the significance of her intent. The velvet box was small, almost deceptively so, but Thomas sensed immediately that it contained something that could disrupt balance, authority, or trust within the palace. The very air seemed to shift around her, a subtle but powerful aura of command that demanded attention, yet he remained steadfast in his resolve. He would not allow the box to leave without oversight. Camilla paused in front of the heavy double doors that led to the private family chambers. She glanced around cautiously, as if ensuring no one observed her actions, then bent slightly, gripping the box firmly. Its locks glinted faintly under the soft light, as if daring anyone to interfere. Thomas stepped forward from the shadows, boots silent but firm against the marble, and cleared his throat gently. "Your Majesty," he said, voice measured, respectful yet unwavering. "That box is not to be removed from this wing without direct authorization. May I inquire its purpose?" Camilla's head tilted slightly, and a thin smile curved her lips. There was a chill beneath it, subtle but unmistakable, and Thomas felt the weight of her presence press against him. "Thomas," she said, her voice smooth yet edged with authority, "I assure you, this is a private matter, one that concerns only me. I do not require your interference." Her eyes gleamed with a combination of amusement and warning, the kind that could freeze the most disciplined staff member in place. Thomas remained firm. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, my duty is to protect the Crown's interests and ensure proper protocol. I cannot allow any item of significance, particularly one that is locked and unverified, to be removed without confirmation." His tone was calm, deliberate, a precise balance of loyalty, duty, and subtle challenge. Camilla's smile faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by an expression of controlled disbelief.
"Are you questioning me, Thomas?"
she asked, voice rising just enough to convey irritation and authority. The soft rustle of her gown and the slight tightening of her grip on the velvet box signaled intent. She was accustomed to compliance, to the quiet obedience of those who served the palace. And Thomas's challenge had clearly struck a chord. The tension in the corridor grew palpable. Servants moving quietly in distant wings paused, sensing a disturbance, while the polished walls and high ceilings seemed to amplify the quiet, charged atmosphere. Thomas felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that always accompanied confrontation with someone of the queen consort's stature. Authority, charisma, and determination collided in this small chamber of shadows and light, and the air thrummed with anticipation. "I am not questioning you, Your Majesty," Thomas said evenly. "I am fulfilling my duty. This box is to remain in place until its contents can be verified by the appropriate parties. My responsibility is to the palace, to the crown, and to all who serve it. I cannot allow it to be moved without oversight." His voice held a subtle firmness, the kind cultivated over decades of disciplined service, and he planted himself squarely between Camilla and the door she intended to pass through. Camilla's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She had expected hesitation, perhaps, but not outright refusal. A ripple of shock passed through the corridor, unnoticed by the distant staff, but fully registered by Thomas. This was not mere defiance. This was a calculated assertion of principle in the face of authority, and the Queen Consort's reaction, subtle yet powerful, confirmed she had not anticipated it. She took a step closer. The box held like a shield and a weapon simultaneously. "Thomas," she said, her voice lowering, the words deliberate. "You are fortunate that I value discretion. But do not misunderstand my patience. This matter is mine alone, and I will ensure it is handled as I see fit. I expect no obstruction." Thomas remained calm, the familiar sense of responsibility anchoring him. "With respect, Your Majesty, my duty does not allow for exception. I serve the Crown, and protecting items of importance is part of that service. This box will remain in place." He spoke each word with precision, carefully balancing respect, authority, and moral conviction. Camilla's reaction was immediate and striking. Her face paled slightly, and her hand tightened on the velvet box, as though bracing for a struggle. Her composed veneer threatened to crack, revealing a flash of anger, disbelief, and uncharacteristic vulnerability. The tension in the corridor thickened, every echo of movement, every shadow amplified by the charged silence. Thomas could feel the pulse of the palace, the weight of centuries of hierarchy and protocol pressing against the moment. A faint click came from the box's locks, subtle but distinct. Thomas's instincts flared. He moved slightly closer, a silent warning, sensing that the Queen Consort's intentions were escalating. Whatever lay within the velvet folds demanded control, secrecy, and, above all, careful handling. The room seemed to shrink around them, each heartbeat amplified in the hollow space between duty and authority. Camilla's gaze flicked toward Thomas, eyes sharp, calculating, and undeniably surprised. She had expected compliance. She had not expected resistance from a guard who combined discipline, moral clarity, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Her hand hovered over the box, her expression frozen between hesitation and defiance. Thomas remained motionless, silent, but resolute, a sentinel of principle in the eye of an unforeseen storm. The tension was broken, briefly, by the distant sound of footsteps approaching, a signal that the palace staff, alerted by the unusual standoff, were moving cautiously toward the corridor. Thomas knew that the moment was critical. Every second mattered. The locked velvet box, Camilla's intent, and the eyes of the unseen staff created a volatile mix of authority, secrecy, and potential scandal. Thomas's presence alone was the thin line between order and chaos. Camilla exhaled slowly, a controlled but audible release, and her eyes softened, if only marginally. There was a recognition in that brief pause. Thomas was unyielding, principled, and unwilling to allow her unilateral action. The Queen Consort's reaction left the corridor charged with disbelief, a mix of admiration, frustration, and stunned recognition of the guard's unwavering dedication. Thomas held his position, eyes steady, posture unbroken, silently conveying that the box would not leave the corridor tonight. Camilla's gaze lingered on him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Power, authority, and moral principle weighed against intent, ambition, and secrecy. The locked velvet box remained untouched, a focal point of suspense, as the palace seemed to pause around them, aware that history, discretion, and personal agendas intersected in this charged standoff. The distant footsteps grew closer, staff nearing the scene, unaware of the delicate confrontation. Thomas remained vigilant, hand resting subtly near his ceremonial sword, eyes never leaving Camilla. The Queen Consort's next move, unpredictable yet deliberate, could determine the outcome of the night. And in that moment, every observer, every whispering shadow, every ancient echo of the palace waited, tense and silent, for what would happen next. Thomas Aldridge's stance remained unwavering, the velvet box between him and Camilla a silent barrier of authority and duty. The Queen Consort's composure, though carefully maintained, flickered with subtle signs of agitation. Her eyes darted toward the corridor exits, measuring distance and opportunity, while her fingers brushed the luxurious fabric of her gown, a subconscious signal of impatience and calculation. The air itself seemed to tighten around the standoff, each second stretching longer, every shadow lengthening, every flicker of candlelight amplifying the suspense. A faint scuffle from down the corridor caught Thomas's attention, a soft, uneven shuffle of shoes over the marble floor. One of the junior palace aides had approached, curiosity or routine guiding them closer to the confrontation. The aide paused, eyes widening as they saw the queen consort standing tensely with the locked box in hand, and Thomas positioned firmly in opposition. The moment was frozen, the staff member unaware of the significance of the box, but sensing the gravity of the standoff. Thomas's hand subtly shifted near the hilt of his ceremonial sword, a silent warning and signal to maintain distance. "Your Majesty," the aide whispered nervously, almost inaudibly, "is everything all right?" The words were innocent, but Thomas knew that even a single misstep could ignite panic or unintended action. He turned sharply, his presence commanding calm. "Step back," he said firmly. "Do not advance further. This matter is private and sensitive. Your safety and that of the palace depend on discretion." The aide froze, retreating a few steps, and Thomas returned his attention fully to Camilla. The queen consort's gaze shifted, now flicking toward the shadows where the aide had been. A faint frown crossed her features, barely perceptible, but Thomas caught it immediately. She was irritated not just by his refusal, but by the invisible audience who might witness even the slightest miscalculation. Her control over the corridor, usually absolute, was challenged by Thomas's steadfast adherence to protocol. The air thickened with tension, the palace itself seeming to lean in, silent walls observing centuries of hierarchy and loyalty play out in real time. A soft rustle from the side of the corridor drew Thomas's attention again. A housekeeper, late on rounds, had entered the east wing. Her eyes widened as she recognized the unusual confrontation, hands clutching a faintly polished silver tray of cutlery. She froze, almost holding her breath, uncertain whether to retreat or investigate. Thomas's instincts flared. The last thing he could allow was for staff to inadvertently become involved. Moving with the silence of experience, he gestured sharply, signaling her to step back behind a marble column, her movements hesitant, almost reverent in their obedience. Camilla's eyes flicked toward the hidden staff. A shadow of irritation passed over her features, a subtle but undeniable reaction to the awareness that she was not alone. "Thomas," she said softly, voice smooth yet tinged with impatience, "you overstate the threat. No one would intervene in my private matters." Her tone was poised, yet the faint tightness in her jaw betrayed her awareness of the unseen witnesses. The locked box, held like a sacred object between them, radiated importance, secrecy, and, Thomas realized, danger, though what precisely it contained remained unknown to him. "I do not overstate anything, Your Majesty," Thomas replied evenly. "It is my duty to ensure that any item of significance remains secure and is not removed without oversight. The palace has rules for such matters, and I serve to uphold them." His voice was calm, measured, but the authority beneath it was undeniable. Camilla's reaction, subtle but visible, was one of stunned recognition. She had expected compliance, and Thomas's resistance now forced her to reconsider her options. The velvet box itself seemed almost to hum with anticipation, the rich fabric glowing faintly under the corridor's soft lighting. Thomas's trained eyes caught the faint glint of the brass locks and the delicate folds of the velvet, signaling that the object was heavier with significance than mere weight or appearance suggested. Rumors of such boxes containing letters, ceremonial items, or artifacts of both personal and political consequence circulated quietly among the staff, but no one dared approach without authorization. Camilla's handling of it, combined with her usual discretion, suggested that what lay within was extraordinary. A faint scraping sound echoed from the far corridor, like the deliberate movement of a key along the marble floor. Thomas stiffened, eyes narrowing. The sound suggested that someone else was approaching, possibly drawn by rumor or instinct. The palace staff, trained in decorum, rarely acted without cause. Yet curiosity in such moments could be dangerous. Thomas's senses flared. He could not allow even a shadow of interference to threaten the integrity of the box. nor risk the queen consort's intentions being compromised by exposure. Camilla shifted slightly, the box held securely in her hands. Her expression hardened, and for a brief moment, Thomas saw the flash of authority that had defined her influence over the royal household. Yet the surprise and irritation at his steadfast refusal remained visible. She had not anticipated a guard who would not yield, who would stand firm between her and the corridor exit. The dynamic was electric, charged with the unspoken awareness of both power and consequence. Another subtle sound, a whispered conversation between two distant aides, reached Thomas's ears. He moved a fraction closer to Camilla, subtly positioning himself to control access to the corridor and prevent any accidental discovery. The palace, vast and ornate, seemed alive with anticipation, each shadow stretching and folding in response to the standoff. Even the portraits lining the walls, faces frozen in gilded frames, seemed to observe the scene, echoing centuries of intrigue and the delicate balance between authority and principle. Camilla's voice softened, though it carried a sharp edge beneath the smooth veneer. "You misunderstand, Thomas. I have handled matters of far greater delicacy than this. Your concern is commendable, but unnecessary." Her fingers brushed the velvet, as if testing the guard's resolve. Thomas remained calm, posture steady, eyes unflinching. His duty required him to protect not only the palace's protocols, but also the very sanctity of the object she sought to remove. The distant footsteps drew closer, the subtle cadence of palace staff nearing the corridor. Thomas's pulse quickened slightly, not with fear, but with the acute awareness that this delicate equilibrium could be broken at any moment. The locked velvet box, the queen consort's authority, and his own steadfast duty formed a triangle of tension, balanced precariously against curiosity, hierarchy, and secrecy. Every second, every breath, every flicker of light heightened the stakes. Camilla's hand hovered over the box once more. Her eyes met Thomas's, a silent negotiation passing between them, authority against principle, determination against loyalty, secrecy against order. Thomas held firm, the quiet tension of decades of palace duty converging in this single, charged moment. The staff, hidden in shadows, watched silently, anticipating action yet aware that discretion was their only protection. The old East Wing, vast, echoing, and layered with centuries of history, seemed to lean in, every polished surface, every shadow, every portrait whispering awareness of the confrontation. Thomas knew that the moment was critical. Camilla's next movement, subtle as it might be, would determine whether the locked velvet box remained in place or vanished into secrecy beyond the corridor. And Thomas, sentinel of the crown, would be the one to decide, quietly, firmly, and without compromise. The tension in the East Wing thickened, almost tangible in the heavy air. Thomas Aldridge's posture remained unyielding, yet his mind raced. Every second brought a new complication, a new risk. The locked velvet box, delicate yet weighted with secrecy, rested firmly in Camilla's hands. But Thomas's presence was an immovable barrier. The queen consort's composure, though polished, showed subtle cracks, her jaw tightening, her eyes narrowing, a faint flush on her cheeks betraying a rare glimpse of vulnerability. This was a side of her few staff had ever witnessed. Authority tempered by frustration, control threatened by the unwavering principle of a single guard. Camilla shifted, her movements deliberate and graceful, but each step was a challenge to Thomas's steady stance. "Thomas," she said, voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge, "you mistake your duty for infallibility. This box, this matter is mine to manage. Step aside." Her tone was silk over steel, polished, authoritative, yet underneath it lay something far more volatile. Impatience, irritation, and the faintest glimmer of desperation. Thomas noted the tension in her hands, the way her grip tightened around the box as though it were both a prize and a shield. "I am not stepping aside, Your Majesty," Thomas replied evenly, his voice firm, precise, and unwavering. "I serve the crown and the integrity of the palace. I cannot allow a sensitive or potentially dangerous item to be removed without verification. This box remains here until proper oversight can be ensured." Each word was measured, deliberate. There was no malice in his tone, only duty and the kind of moral clarity that could withstand pressure from the highest authority in the palace. Camilla's eyes flicked toward the corridor, and for a fleeting moment, Thomas saw calculation in her expression. She had considered subterfuge, perhaps a subtle maneuver to bypass his guard, yet the weight of decades of palace decorum constrained her. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "You leave me no choice, Thomas," she whispered, voice lower, almost a hiss. "I must have this box." She shifted the weight in her arms slightly, testing him, seeking any hint of hesitation. Thomas remained motionless, every muscle taut, every instinct alert. The faint rustle of movement in the corridor reminded Thomas of the unseen staff. The junior aide crouched behind a marble column, wide-eyed and tense, and the housekeeper, frozen near the side entrance. Their presence, though silent, heightened the stakes. If Camilla attempted any sudden maneuver, witnesses could inadvertently turn the confrontation into scandal. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He would not allow that. Not tonight. Not under his watch. Camilla's patience snapped. She made a subtle step forward, a small but deliberate motion intended to assert dominance. Thomas responded instantly, shifting his stance slightly to block the path, positioning himself squarely in front of her. The locked velvet box was now a literal and figurative barrier between authority and principle, desire and duty. "Your Majesty," he said firmly, voice calm but unwavering, "I will not allow you to remove this box. Step back, or I must intervene physically to ensure compliance." For the first time, surprise crossed Camilla's features. She had anticipated resistance, but the absolute steadiness of Thomas's posture, the immovable calm of his tone, and the sheer certainty of his duty caught her off guard. A flicker of disbelief passed through her eyes, replaced quickly by irritation, then calculation. She weighed options, subtly shifting the box, testing the limits of his resolve. Thomas remained unyielding. Each subtle motion, each silent calculation, heightened the suspense in the corridor, the air thick with anticipation, the shadows alive with history and consequence. The faint creak of a distant door reminded Thomas of the approaching staff. Time was slipping away. Every second, every breath could shift the balance. If Camilla acted, she could ignite a scene that would ripple through the palace hierarchy. If he acted preemptively, he risked challenging the authority of the queen consort directly. Thomas inhaled slowly, centering himself, preparing for whatever might come next. He was not merely a guard in this moment. He was the fulcrum on which secrecy, order, and duty balanced precariously. Camilla's voice softened slightly, though it carried unmistakable command. "Thomas," she said, deliberate and cold, "you have always been loyal, but you misunderstand the nature of discretion. Some matters cannot be delayed. Some actions must be taken immediately. Step aside, or I will remove it regardless." Her gaze bore into his, a mixture of authority and veiled threat, testing the limits of his resolve. Thomas met her eyes, unflinching. There was no hesitation, no doubt. His duty, principle, and understanding of the palace's delicate equilibrium held firm. With a sudden, sharp motion, Camilla shifted the box toward herself, testing the boundary between his authority and her intent. Thomas reacted instantly, moving one step forward to block the passage. The collision of will was silent but palpable. The locked velvet box, fragile yet powerful, symbolized more than secrecy. It was a fulcrum of trust, power, and potential scandal. The tension was almost unbearable. Every heartbeat amplified, every shadow a silent witness to the struggle. The distant sound of footsteps accelerated staff nearing the corridor, sensing disturbance, though unaware of the details. Thomas knew that any escalation now had to be carefully controlled. He leaned slightly closer, voice firm but quiet, ensuring that only Camilla could hear. "Your Majesty," he said, "I respect your authority, but this box cannot leave this wing tonight. My duty compels me to prevent it. I will not step aside." Camilla's reaction was instantaneous and shocking. Her eyes widened briefly, a flicker of genuine disbelief crossing her features. She had expected compliance, or at least hesitation, not this absolute immovable resolve. Her lips parted, a soft exhale escaping, a subtle acknowledgement that she had underestimated the strength of Thomas's principle. For a heartbeat, the queen consort seemed almost stunned, her control threatened by the steadfast loyalty of a single man in uniform. Then, as if gathering herself, she straightened, voice sharper and more commanding. "Very well," she said, the words clipped, deliberate. "You have made your choice. But know this, Thomas, my patience is not infinite. The next move may not be yours to control." Her expression hardened, the velvet box still clutched tightly in her hands, every line of her posture radiating determination, authority, and subtle menace. Thomas's gaze did not waver. He was ready. The locked velvet box, Camilla's determination, and the approaching staff created a volatile equation, one that could erupt at any second into confrontation, scandal, or revelation. He took a measured breath, hand resting subtly near his sword, stance steady, eyes locked on the queen consort. He knew that this night, this corridor, and this box were the fulcrum on which principle, duty, and discretion balanced precariously, and he would not yield. The east wing seemed to pause around them, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows, the polished walls reflecting tension, and the portraits on the walls bearing silent witness. Thomas understood the truth in that instant. The confrontation had reached its peak. The next moment, the next action, would determine whether order was maintained or chaos erupted. And Thomas, sentinel of the crown, would face it head-on. The corridor of the east wing seemed suspended in time. Thomas Aldridge's boots were planted firmly on the marble floor, his posture unyielding, eyes locked on Camilla, who held the locked velvet box with a combination of authority, defiance, and frustration. The tension between them was almost palpable, charged with the weight of protocol, secrecy, and centuries of palace expectation. Every flicker of candlelight, every shadow, every soft echo in the hall amplified the silent standoff. Thomas understood that this was no ordinary moment. The velvet box was more than a possession. It was a symbol of power, discretion, and potential scandal. Camilla's fingers tightened around the box, and for a fleeting second, her expression softened not from submission, but calculation. She realized that Thomas's resolve was not born of fear, politeness, or hesitancy. It was principle, experience, and an unyielding commitment to duty. The realization seemed to surprise her, even unsettle her, and for a heartbeat, the queen consort seemed unsure how to proceed. Thomas sensed the shift, the subtle hesitation, and he maintained his position, silently communicating that any further action would require her to confront not only him, but the authority and order of the palace itself. "Thomas," she said softly, voice smooth yet carrying a faint edge of warning, "you overestimate your power in this corridor. That box, its contents are mine to control. You cannot stop me forever." Her tone was deliberate, her eyes glinting with a mixture of irritation and calculation. Yet beneath the carefully measured words, there was an undercurrent of genuine uncertainty, a rare acknowledgement of the guard's immovable position. "I do not seek power, Your Majesty," Thomas replied, his voice calm but unwavering. "I serve the crown. My duty is to ensure that nothing is removed from the palace that could compromise trust, secrecy, or security. That box will remain here until proper oversight can confirm its contents and determine its handling. You may wish otherwise, but I cannot allow it to leave this wing." His tone carried no arrogance, only certainty, and for the first time, Camilla appeared to weigh the limits of her authority against his principle. A faint shuffle from down the corridor reminded Thomas of the hidden staff, the junior aide and housekeeper, frozen in the shadows. He gestured subtly, signaling them to stay put, their wide eyes reflecting awe and tension. One misstep, one sudden movement, could ignite chaos. Thomas's gaze returned to Camilla. The queen consort's lips pressed into a thin line, her usual composure beginning to falter as frustration and calculation warred for dominance. She exhaled sharply, a quiet but deliberate sound, and shifted the box in her hands. "Very well," she said, voice controlled but edged with impatience. "If you insist on this, we will see how long your resolve holds. But know this, opportunities are fleeting, and secrets do not remain hidden indefinitely." Her eyes glimmered with a promise of challenge, subtle yet unmistakable. Thomas remained still, hand near his ceremonial sword, stance steady, unwavering. The faint sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Staff, drawn by rumor or instinct, nearing the corridor. Thomas knew that the tension could not hold indefinitely. Each moment increased the risk of exposure, misinterpretation, or inadvertent conflict. He shifted slightly, positioning himself strategically between Camilla and the corridor exits, ensuring that no one could inadvertently witness a breach of protocol. The locked velvet box, small yet powerful, was the focal point of this delicate balance, a symbol of both authority and secrecy.